There is a myth about the liberation of Yugoslavia from the Nazi invaders only by the Yugoslav partisans. The truth is quite different. Most of the Yugoslav state was liberated by the intervention of the Soviet army and Albanian partisans. After the Albanian partisans liberated Shkodra on November 28 to 29, 1944, they crossed the state border and crossed into Yugoslav territory. On September 12, 1944, the commander-in-chief of UNCH, the Albanian acronym of the National Liberation Army, enverhoxha, ordered the 1st Corps to immediately prepare and send 2 brigades to Kosovo. At the end of 1944, Division 6 was formed in Shkodra, consisting of 4 brigades, namely, Brigade 6th, Brigade 7, Brigade 8 and Brigade 22. The commander of this division was Jean Marcu, who, being in charge, commanded his combat actions outside the border for the liberation of Yugoslavia, during December 1944 until the summer of 1945. The wing of the combat actions was from Shkodra to Montenegro and up to Visegrad in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The fight for the liberation of Lezhë and Shkodra necessarily required the combination and coordination of combat actions between the partisan formations. In these war conditions, Division 6S was formed. The appointment of Jean Marcu as division commander was based on the great successes of the 7th S Brigade, in operational combat actions in Berat, Mizake, Mirdita, Lezhë, and Shkodra, the commander of which was Jean Marcu. This division consisted of 6th Brigade, which included partisans from Kurveleshi, Gjirokastra, Tipalina, Permiti, Himara, Samaria, Vlora, Elbasani, Saranda, Delvina, Shkodra, Puka, Tropaja and other provinces. This brigade included 5 battalions, Asimzini, Baba Abbas, Naim Frasheri, Abbas Shuanzo Koka. Most of the partisans were experienced in war, and within this brigade they had participated in the liberation of many provinces and some cities. The commander of this brigade was Major Jahogyo Liku and the Commissar Major Exhul Saraku. The 7th Brigade, with partisans from Skrapari, Berat, Permiti, Korch, Fieri, Lushnja, Mirdita, Lezhë, Shkodra, etc., was an old and seasoned brigade. This brigade liberated Berat, Fier, Lushnja, Mirdita, Lezhë and was an important force in the liberation of Shkodra. Its partisans had fought everywhere heroically and had successfully withstood major enemy operations. In being framed, as we have mentioned before, the first partisan detachments and battalions of Berat district and other districts with long war experience. This brigade until the formation of the division had its commander Colonel Jean Marcu, then Major Musa Dasi was appointed, while Major Kazım Kapasizzi was the political commissar. The 8th Brigade, a brigade of brave warriors seasoned in the hardships of war. The special feature of this brigade was that its partisans had endured the 18 days and nights of the war for the liberation of Tirana. In its composition, this brigade had 4 battalions. The commander of this brigade was appointed Major Fedi Smokthina and political commissar Major Rasim Bazo. The 22nd S Brigade carried forward the fighting spirit of the Pisa Regiment, as it had all the old fighters of Pisa in its bosom, with a rare war experience. It included 4 battalions, Malik Musa Battalion, Ertsani Battalion, Kayo Karafili Battalion and Shiok Battalion. Major Salih Verdun and political commissar Major Nimita Marin were commanders of this brigade. Later, hundreds and thousands of Albanians from Montenegro, Kosovo, Sanjak, etc. were added to the ranks of the V attacking division. A little later, on the basis of 6 artillery batteries and mortars, the division's artillery brigade was formed, consisting of 3 artillery groups and 36 fire nozzles. From April 1945 to December of that year, the 3rd Assault Brigade, one of the first brigades of our National Liberation Army, a brigade with an experience and a long combat path, was included with the V Assault Division. This division had Colonel Jean Marcu as its commander throughout the war campaign in Montenegro, Bosnia, and Kosovo. At this time, this famous anti-fascist was only 26 years old. Colonel Anjazi Islami, at one time Izefir Spaho, was appointed political commissar of the division. The 6th Division fights bloody battles chasing the Nazi beast into southern Bosnia, always under the command of Jean Marcu. Based on this extremely valuable document, it is easy to conclude that the battles fought with the Germans for the liberation of Tuzi, Podgorica, Sanjak, and Visegrad, as well as Mitrovica, Vucitrni, etc., were the bloodiest but also triumphal of the partisan forces of the 6th Attacking Division. But why did they fight in the territories of Yugoslavia? The Tito-enverhoxha alliance is thought to be the reason for the participation of the Albanian partisans in the liberation of Yugoslavia. Since the Albanian party division crossed the border and started the first days of fighting in Montenegro, beginning of December 1944, the question was asked, Why did our army cross the border? This answer was given at that time by the newspaper Jahona Ishkadra, where it explains that in this unprecedented war in the history of mankind, the peoples have fraternized, they have suffered and they have all been oppressed by the same enemy. Therefore, we are determined to at the end and faithful to the path we have taken, we cross the state borders to follow foot by foot the 21st German Corps, which is the rear guard of the Hitlerian army. We are proud when the communiques of our General Staff and the Allies mention our heroic brigades with new victories. With the new victories, we are cementing and guaranteeing the eternity of our national independence, which would not only be in danger, but we would not even have the right to open our mouths if we had not followed this path of liberation today with such loyalty and patriotism. We continue to pursue it until the end, until the complete destruction of the enemy of humanity, until the establishment of peace, at whose table we will participate with full right. For the month of December 1944 to March 1945, there were many battles, up to hand-to-hand combat between the partisans of the V Division and the Nazi German forces. The diary we mentioned is the document that best proves this true war epic of the V Assault Division commanded by Jean Marcu. There are many details that show the fraternal feeling between the Slavic peoples and the legendary Albanian partisans of this division who were considered saviors and who were seen with deep respect and gratitude by these peoples. We do not intend to present the whole of this great history of our war, but very few other events and moments. After several battles in Tuz, D6 and especially in Podgorica, Division 6, on December 19, 1944, in cooperation with the Yugoslav forces, liberated Podgorica. Some announcements are given about these fights by some radios of the world. Radio Moscow announces that attempts by the Germans to open the road from Sanjak, in order to come to the aid of the besieged group in Podgorica, have failed and the Germans have suffered bloody losses. On December 19, the main junction where the German forces were concentrated, Podgorica, was liberated. In the battles for the liberation of Podgorica, from December 17 to December 19, the losses from both sides are: enemy losses, killed, 250 soldiers and officers, about 300 injured. Our losses, killed, 30, injured, 50 people. As for the tough fight in Kalushin, on the last day of 1944, Radio London announced, in Montenegro, the Albanian division, after fierce fighting, liberated Matoševo and Kalushin, reaching the gates of Mijkovac. At the end of the fighting for the liberation of Montenegro, 116 fighters from the Albanian Party division were killed in fighting, 223 were wounded. Some of the wounded died later from the serious wounds they had received in the fighting. During the burial of some partisan martyrs, a Montenegrin from the Kuchi province spoke and said, "You stepped on every bad thing that separates and divides the people's ours. You did what seemed like it would never happen. The blood that wet this earth will never become water. We will always remember them. We will always say, the Albanians came to our lands and were killed for us, and every time we look at this place we will say, these are the graves of the Albanians who came in the days of danger and helped us Montenegrins."
In Bosnia, towards Visegrad, towards Sarajevo, January to March 1945, on New Year's Eve, Commander Jean Marcu distributes Call No. 2 of the Division Command, which states, "Partisans and military and political leaders of Division 6S. The hopes of the victory of fascism went down. The armies of the Red Army and the Allied armies are ending 1944 with great successes. The whole world is severely beating the Nazi beast, burying it. And together with other peoples fighting fascism, the name of our heroic army also appears. Friend and friend, the volleys of bullets and grenades that you threw into these gorges and valleys made the Hitlerites bleed even further. Now all the land of Montenegro was liberated. For a month, day and night, the fighting continued, but you, as always, faced the enemy in the strong winter. Completion of certain tasks, the successes that were achieved during this year make you proud in the history of our people. Partisans and partisans, the year 1945 will be the year that will topple the Nazi ruin from its foundations. Our task is to follow the Nazis step by step, to hit the enemy columns everywhere, day and night, until their complete destruction. We wish the partisans of the division that the new year 1945 will be the year of victory. Glory to the martyrs. On the first day of the new year 1945, the march begins. The fight for the liberation of Visegrad. In fact, since January 12 in the city of Plevlia, when the commander of the V Division Jean Marcu gathered the brigade staffs to clarify the situation and to give the order to continue the pursuit of the enemy up to Visegrad, the battle for the liberation of Visegrad had begun. The battles around the city, especially those in the town of Rudo and those of the Lim e Drino River Valley, were decisive in creating the conditions for the attack on Visegrad. February 14 is the day of the liberation of Visegrad. Here is what the war diary of the V Division says. The battle in the city is fought by the 8th Brigade through the windows of houses, in the recesses of bunkers, from room to room, from house to house and from alley to alley. The brigade had the experience of fighting in the city in the liberation of Tirana. This was the reason why the division commander, Colonel Jin Marku, entrusted the attack on the city to this brigade. At the same time, the 22th Brigade moves from Dobrin towards the city. The liberation of Visegrad and its surroundings was achieved through a series of hand-to-hand battles with the Hitlerian army, whose collaborators were also the Chetniks. These battles, which are described in detail in the war diary of the V Assault Division, lasted 31 days. Combat balance and importance. In the fighting for the liberation of the city of Visegrad, 119 partisans were killed and over 200 others were seriously wounded, many of whom died in hospitals from their wounds. Parallel to the combat operations of the V Division, the V Attack Division, commanded by Roman Prolaku, operated as far as Sanjak. Of course, the main weight in the struggle for the liberation of the lands in Yugoslavia was held by the V Assault Division. 600 partisans lost their lives and more than 1,000 others were injured in the battles of the V and V Assault Divisions in Sanjak, Montenegro and Bosnia. The VS Brigade carried out operations on the railway connecting Visegrad with Sarajevo. Likewise the 7 Brigade. With these actions, the possibility of the enemy to bring forces to hit ours in the back is removed. It was a joint action of all the forces of the VS Division, with a single goal, the liberation of the city. In the afternoon of February 14, the city of Visegrad was liberated. Great damage was inflicted on the enemy. 6,000 killed, almost twice as many wounded, 615 soldiers taken prisoner. 96 cannons, 17 tanks and armored vehicles, 101 machine guns, 86 cars with ammunition and thousands of rifles and revolvers were taken. The VS Division honorably completed the tasks. For the liberation of Montenegro and Bosnia. At the end of the fighting for the liberation of the city of Visegrad and its surroundings, the division commander, Colonel Jin Marku, announced to the General Staff in Tirana. The provinces of Brzo, Rudo, Dobrin and Visegrad have been freed from the clutches of the Nazis and the Chetniks, from the forces of the V Attack Division. This war of the V Attack Division, commanded by Commander Jin Marku, had a special importance for the Albanian state after the Second World War in several ways. First, Albania joined the anti-fascist coalition, the largest known coalition in world history. This grand coalition designed the political regime in the world. Albania guaranteed with its anti-fascist war its territorial integrity, and the Albanian state had a higher level in international status by becoming a member of the UN with full rights from the beginning, when world powers such as China, etc., won it much more late this status. Secondly, this liberation war created very good conditions for the fraternization of peoples in the former Yugoslavia, as a challenge for their peaceful future. This friendship would be destroyed by the communist spirit that, unfortunately, these peoples were conquered by it, along with other peoples of the East. Not in Sarajevo, but back to Kosovo. When everything was ready to attack towards Sarajevo, in the last days of February, the order comes that the VS Division will change the plan and start the war march from Visegrad through Sanjak to Kosovo. In the building where the division headquarters was located, in the city of Rudo, at the time of the meeting, in the morning the radio operator received a phonogram from Tirana. Required. Division 6 to cease fighting in Bosnia and concentrate in Kosovo, in the area of Mitrovica Vucetern Podujevo. This order overturned any preparations of the division to participate in the fighting for the liberation of Sarajevo. A few days later, the division commander, Colonel Jin Marku, presented the brigade headquarters with the itinerary and the march chart. It was clarified that the division would march through the mountains of Sanjak to reach Kosovo. The area where the march would take place is poor, burned and scarred by war. The terrain, generally broken and covered with snow. Commander Jin Marku explained that the lack of food on the march would be present. This was the biggest danger that we are asked to be careful of, said the division commander. The news that we were going to Kosovo was welcomed. Kosovo. An eternal dream for every Albanian. This march in very difficult conditions started on March 4, 1945 and lasted until March 12, when the combat formations of the division paraded in Mitrovica. After the war, a commission was sent from the Republic of Albania to retrieve the dead bodies of Albanian partisans who were killed in Yugoslavia. This was done in the 1970s. They had valuable help from local state institutions as well as local residents.
This grand coalition designed the political regime in the world. Albania guaranteed with its anti-fascist war its territorial integrity, and the Albanian state had a higher level in international status by becoming a member of the United Nations with full rights from the beginning, when world powers such as China, etc., wanted much more late this status. Secondly, this liberation war created very good conditions for the fraternization of peoples in the former Yugoslavia, as a challenge for their peaceful future. This friendship would be destroyed by the communist spirit that, unfortunately, these peoples were conquered by it, along with other peoples of the East. Not in Sarajevo, but back to Kosovo. When everything was ready to attack towards Sarajevo, in the last days of February, the order comes that the 6th Division will change the plan and start the war march from Visegrad through Sanjak to Kosovo. In the building where the division headquarters was located, in the city of Rudo, at the time of the meeting, in the morning the radio operator received a phonogram from Tirana. Required, Division 6th to cease fighting in Bosnia and concentrate in Kosovo, in the area of Mitrovica Vucetern Padujevo. This order overturned any preparations of the division to participate in the fighting for the liberation of Sarajevo. A few days later, the division commander, Colonel Jin Marku, presented the brigade headquarters with the itinerary and the march chart. It was clarified that the division would march through the mountains of Sanjak to reach Kosovo. The area where the march would take place is poor, burned and scarred by war. The terrain, generally broken and covered with snow. Commander Jin Marku explained that the lack of food on the march would be present. This was the biggest danger that we are asked to be careful of, said the division commander. The news that we were going to Kosovo was welcomed. Kosovo, an eternal dream for every Albanian. This march in very difficult conditions started on March 4, 1945 and lasted until March 12, when the combat formations of the division paraded in Mitrovica. After the war, a commission was on February 8, 1945. The Serbian Yugoslav regime established a military administration in Kosovo alone, which was completely led by the Serbian Montenegrin military. By special order of the Yugoslav military leader, the violent mobilization of the Albanians had also begun. The mobilized were divided into two parts. A part was sent to the Srem front, while the other part was sent to the Adriatic front, over 22,000 soldiers. The second part of the mobilized or Albanian recruits were first gathered in Prizren, where they stayed for several days, where they were disarmed and where they were divided into echelons and other military units. Then they continued on their way to Tivar, through Kuka, Fushe Ara, Fuke and Shkodër, but with the Serbian command of the 46th Division of Serbia. On the way, walking through the cold, without food and not being allowed to quench their thirst, several hundred Albanian soldiers were killed. Upon reaching Tivar, on April 1, 1945, a mass massacre of soldiers, Albanian recruits, followed. This heroic war has been forgotten and is not even mentioned in any kind of book about World War II.